we've already discussed how to make a color like yellow or red or any color that's lighter on our palette and then carry it from a light value to a dark value. In this lesson, we'll discuss another way of taking a color and then going from light to dark without using black. So one way to do that is, so let's pick a color. In our case, we're going to choose yellow again. And once again, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. After the fifth layer, the color stops changing. It doesn't get any darker, and it doesn't get any more intense. So that's when I know I need to start to add a different color. Now, when you're making choices on what color to add, so one way to do it is to add black. But in this case, we're gonna add a different color. So scanning my palette, I'm gonna ask myself, well, is there a color that looks darker and still feels close to yellow? So here we have our yellow. So we want to go darker, and it should still feel yellow. And that essentially is like one of your neighboring colors. It's like your neighbor. So let's rule out some of the obvious ones. This is darker, but that's red, so we're no longer going to get yellow. This feels a little better, but it still feels a bit orange. So if you want to kind of sort of test it out, you can, on a piece of paper, you can just throw in some swatches. So here's my yellow, right? And you're basically making a lot of guesses until you find the one that kind of feels right. So this is obviously too red. Let's go down to here. Well, let's add this next to it. Okay. I mean, that's a little bit darker, not much, but it doesn't feel yellow. How about this one right here? This one maybe. And as you can see, I'm really digging into my watercolor. That's why they have all these holes in my palette. Okay, now that feels closer to yellow, right? And it doesn't necessarily feel darker. It feels a little bit darker, right? Let's try some of the other colors, right? And you can easily rule out a lot of colors. So green won't work. This is a kind of blue. Let's go ahead and dig that in there, right? So that's kind of a teal blue. So these are all your blue range, so those aren't going to work. Let's go over to here, right? And some of these colors you're going to need to dig because when they're all sort of packed together, they're just going to look dark until you kind of add water to it and then put it on your paper. All right, so that's green, so that won't work. This is clearly red. What about this one? This one actually looks pretty promising. That looks like a yellowish color, and it does appear like it's a bit darker. So let's add that right there. Okay. So this definitely looks like it's still in the yellow family, except it appears to be very dull. And that's okay, because if you look at the chart that we used when we just added black, right? As the yellow gets darker and darker, it also gets duller and duller. So it's not going to be as saturated as your yellow here, right? As you get darker, it's definitely going to get a little duller. This yellow here looks darker and it looks duller. So that makes it, at least in my opinion, a very good candidate for a color to use. Okay, let's see what's this color down right over here. Okay, and this one is another green. And then just for comparison, I'm also going to place my black here as well. So looking at our little swatches, we're dealing with yellow, right? So we want it to be darker and we want it to feel yellow. So any number of these do feel darker, so this feels darker, right? This certainly feels darker. This feels darker, right? So getting darker is pretty easy, but getting it to feel yellow is actually quite hard. So in terms of what feels yellow, this feels yellow. This feels kind of on the yellow side, right? And I'm also going to circle black. Even though black doesn't feel yellow, we do know that as it gets darker, right? As yellow gets darker, or any other color for that matter, it starts to lose a little more of its identity. So we're going to keep black in there. And the other reason why we want to keep black in there is because this color here, right? This color here also has a limit in terms of how dark it can go. So you'll definitely need to have the black when you're working with the very darkest of colors. Okay, so now that we've isolated to the colors that we want, when I prepare my mixtures, I will mix the yellow, right? So we have our yellow. Let's bring this thing down. We'll have our yellow, and I have a choice from going with this item here or with this item here. Now, from experience, there's a, I think this could work as well, but from my experience, I want to go with this because I feel that as it gets darker, the yellow does get a little duller, and I want to go in this direction. However, it still could work with this. It's just really a choice. In fact, why don't we do one where we're doing a little bit of both? So I'm going to go with this color first to make that yellow. Right, so this yellow here is a mixture of our original yellow and then the one right above it. And let's add this to our chart. And there is a little bit of subjectivity to this part here. I mean, like what the actual yellow looks like as you go darker. You know, it could depend. But I don't believe that there's any kind of standard. I mean, there might be with yours, like during printing processes, but in terms of painting, it's not that strict. Okay, so we added that yellow here. Okay, so it feels a little darker. It is shifting the yellow to being a little bit warmer, and of course, all right, this might take a little while to dry. Okay, so we have that. So let's add a little bit more yellow. You can continue to add a bit of this color as well, and you can also start to add the other color as well. So you're not restricted to only 2 mixtures, but you can have a little bit more. So in this case, in this puddle here, I've added some yellow, I've added some of this yellow orange, and I've added this yellow ochre. Okay, so let's go ahead and add the next layer. And you can already start to see how that yellow looks a little bit different than the version up top, which is just black. This definitely feels like it's a warmer yellow versus this one feels like that yellow is more skewing towards the green side. Now I'll soften that edge just a tad. Okay. Alright, so continuing on, this time I'm going to add a little bit more of that yellow ochre, maybe a little bit of this. And it already feels like I'm hitting my limit in terms of how dark I can get with this combination.